Lake Ontario Waterkeeper is a Canadian charity. We were founded in 2001. Our mission is to make Lake Ontario and the Great Lakes swimmable, drinkable, fishable now and for future generations. We started in 2001 in the wake of the Walkerton water tragedy.
The problem with the water in Walkerton. An E. coli epidemic in Grey County kills 3 people.
More people are likely to die from this.
Mark Matson, my co-founder, and I felt like that was something that should never happen in Ontario, and definitely something that shouldn't happen in the watershed where we live. So we started an organization really to protect the most important uses of the lake: drinking water, recreational water quality contact, and also fishing and consumption of fish from the Great Lakes. So the most important thing for us is recreational water contact. That means swimming, boating, paddling. You should be able to touch the lake without getting sick, without getting a rash. So we built Swim Guide, which is a beach finder app. It started here on Lake Ontario. Really simple concept. It helps people find the closest beach, tells them whether or not it meets water quality standards. That app really inspired hundreds of other communities and is now active all across Canada, the United States, Mexico, New Zealand. The other things that we do are very practical, so we want to be part of decision-making processes. We want to make sure that people who are planning projects or looking at what to do in the watershed remember that this body of water is supposed to be safe to touch. It is a source of food for a lot of people, and it is our drinking water supply. 9 million people drink from the lake. So all of those uses need to be protected, whether you're planning an urban development or a new power plant or thinking about how to clean up old historic sites. Compared to the other Great Lakes, Lake Ontario is in the worst condition. All of our waste and wastewater is going into Lake Ontario. We have huge energy industry on Lake Ontario, powering most of southern Ontario. We're hammered by anything that's coming in from the ocean, so invasive species, and we're also hammered by all the pollution that's coming from the upper lakes. Everything flows through Lake Ontario on its way out to the ocean. 1/5 of the population of Canada actually depends on this lake for survival. It's probably the most important watershed in the country. When you look at Canadians, if you do any poll or any study or any survey, they are more likely than people in any other country to say that they love water and they love nature. But then when you benchmark Canada against other developed nations, we actually rank at the bottom when it comes to environmental protection measures. So we've been scratching our heads for a while trying to understand how can it be that we say that we love water, but we actually don't do a very good job taking care of it. And we've found that there's an enormous water literacy gap. People actually just don't understand that they live in a watershed, that the water that they consume comes from somewhere, that everything that they do from their job to what they flush down their toilet affects the water around them. The water literacy gap comes from a few things. One, it's the way that we've actually built our urban and suburban environments. So, in Oshawa, where I grew up, the least prosperous community was the community on the waterfront. It was a place that nobody wanted to go. In Toronto, we actually constructed highways. There are so many barriers for people who want to go from downtown to the waterfront that we block it out. Psychologically, it's like the waterfront isn't even there. So it takes someone going out on the water, usually in a boat, sometimes at a beach, looking back at the land to get a whole new perspective on where they live and their relationship to water. Areas of concern were identified in 1972, an agreement between the United States and Canada. The two countries basically said the Great Lakes are incredibly important. We understand that there are serious environmental concerns, and we want to do a better job working together to take care of them. They identified what they called areas of concern, meaning that these are the worst of the worst and the hot spots that really need to be fixed up. In Ontario, on Lake Ontario, there's the Bay of Quinte, which is affected because it's shallow, warm water. So you get nutrients, you get runoff, and that's where you're going to get algal blooms and impacts on fish earlier than other parts of the lake. Port Hope Harbor, Ganaraska River is another area of concern. That's a legacy from the early days of the nuclear industry. So first it was for weapons, then it was for nuclear power. 96% of Canada's low-level radioactive waste is scattered around the Port Hope community, which affects water quality in the harbor. Another area of concern on Lake Ontario is Toronto Harbour, and that is largely a wastewater problem. So wastewater carries sewage, industrial waste into the harbour. You've got nasty chemicals like PCBs, you've got old pesticides, some of which are now banned, and then you've got actual sewage from people's homes. The city has made great strides in the last 20 years at collecting and treating more of the sewage, but that doesn't mean that we're actually still doing a great job. And then the other area of concern on Lake Ontario is Hamilton Harbour.
My name is Chris McLaughlin. I'm the Executive Director of the Bay Area Restoration Council. Since 1991, we've been the public voice in restoration, and our main job is to engage the citizenry in the activities to restore the harbour and try to change perceptions about Hamilton Harbour. Randall Reef is an area of Hamilton Harbour possessing the country's worst coal tar deposit. Coal tar is a byproduct of steel making and contains, among many other things, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. And with the restoration of the Sydney tar ponds, we now hold the title as the worst coal tar contaminated site in the country. It's a significant part of the remedial action plan for Hamilton Harbour. The remedial action plan was developed beginning in the late 1980s in order to restore water quality. And in Hamilton, the RAP, as it's known, is a series of actions and activities that will be undertaken to restore water quality, fish and wildlife, to remediate toxic sediment, and restore all of the multi-uses of the harbour in a safe way. Randall Reef is an area of material that's been ejected from pipes over the last 100 and plus years. It's industrial waste, municipal waste, and the volume of material, contaminated toxic sediment at Randall Reef is enough to fill the former Copps Coliseum hockey arena in Hamilton 3 times. So it's this massive area of toxic sediment, and the idea behind the project is to build a steel wall around the worst area and then dredge the remaining sediment from the outlying area and fill the steel box, as it were, cap it, and then be used for light industrial purposes afterwards. Basically to create a separation between the toxic material and the rest of the bay. We can't pretend that we know all of the consequences ultimately of that spill in slow motion, and really that speaks ultimately to why this project's so important. It doesn't solve all our problems in Hamilton, but it helps address probably the biggest one, which is the idea that we're Hamilton. We don't deserve nice things because we're kind of dirty. And it's not like that. When you look out around in the bay today from where we're at right now, you look out to the West Harbour, it's beautiful. The viewpoints, the pending development at Pier 8, all of the new condo developments going in, none of that would be possible without all the work of the remedial action plan over the last 30 years.
So in the 1970s, that's when Canada and the US decided that the Great Lakes needed more attention, and they did a fantastic job of setting benchmarks and goals, coming to an agreement that more work needed to be done. Then they invested in science and research. So into the 80s, some really phenomenal research was done, identifying threats to the Great Lakes, documenting what's happening here, what species are living here, and making plans to restore and protect the lakes. And then some strides were made, but the momentum has kind of fizzled a bit. Part of it is that people think that because progress was made that the job is done. That's not the case. Part of it is that when climate change became an issue, and a fairly overwhelming and intimidating issue, some of the water quality concerns that were identified in the 1970s were seen as passé or yesterday's news. So the one thing that we're hoping people really understand is that a lot of work needs to be done to protect the Great Lakes, but the investment is worth it. They're the heart of our economy, they're the heart of culture, they're the heart of life for most people in Canada and a lot of people in the United States. It's also an incredible opportunity for the Canada and United States governments to collaborate over shared values and shared vision to build something and protect something that makes the entire world a healthier and happier place to be.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.